Have you ever wondered about the peculiar nature of viruses? Are they living organisms or not? This is a question that has boggled the minds of scientists for years. What makes viruses so intriguing is their unique position on the boundary of life and non-life. They seem to possess characteristics of both, yet they are unlike any other organisms we know. They are capable of replicating and mutating their genomes. But unlike other living beings, their reproduction is not autonomous. It is entirely dependent on the host's nucleic acid and protein synthesizing machinery. In this series, we will delve into 6 non-living characteristics that separate viruses from other life forms. These include their lack of cellular organization, absence of metabolic machinery, inability to reproduce autonomously, absence of growth, unresponsiveness to stimuli, and the ability to be crystallized. So buckle up. Prepare to delve into the fascinating world of viruses and their non-living characteristics. Firstly, let's explore the cellular nature of viruses. Delving into the microscopic world of viruses, one of the most striking features is their acellular structure. Unlike cells, which are the basic units of life, viruses are devoid of protoplasm, cell organelles, and other cellular components. This absence of cellular organization sets them apart from all other forms of life. The viral structure is minimalist, composed merely of a genome encased in proteins. This genome can be either DNA or RNA, depending on the type of virus. The protein shell, known as the capsid, serves as a protective coat for the viral genome. In some instances, viruses may also possess an envelope derived from the host's cell membrane. However, this envelope is not a product of the virus itself, but rather a borrowed item from its host. In essence, the simplicity of their structure underscores the fact that viruses are fundamentally different from other life forms. This lack of cellular organization is the first core non-living characteristic of viruses. The second non-living characteristic of viruses is their lack of metabolic machinery. Unlike living organisms that have a complex set of systems to produce energy, viruses simply don't have this ability. They lack the respiratory mechanisms that organisms like us have, which are crucial for the production of energy. This means they can't break down food to produce energy, nor can they carry out other metabolic processes that are part and parcel of being alive. So, how do they manage to survive and replicate? Well, they do so by relying heavily on their hosts. Yes, viruses are the ultimate freeloaders. They tap into the host's energy reserves to carry out processes like viral replication. They use the energy produced by the host cells, essentially hijacking their machinery for their own benefit. This absence of metabolic machinery, this inability to make their own energy, this dependency on the host, further emphasizes the non-living nature of viruses. Scene script. Next, we delve into the non-autonomous nature of viral reproduction and their lack of growth. Viruses are exceptional entities. They possess the ability to multiply, yet this action is not self-directed. It's more like a hijacking, where the virus takes control of the host cell's machinery. Picture a virus as a rogue software program. It infiltrates a computer, exploits the existing system, and replicates itself. Here's how it works. A virus attaches itself to a host cell, then injects its own genetic material into that cell. This could be DNA or RNA, depending on the type of virus. Once inside, it uses the host's own nucleic acids and protein synthesizing machinery to replicate its genome and produce its proteinaceous coat. This process is entirely dependent on the host cell. The virus cannot do it autonomously. This dependence on a host is a stark contrast to other life forms, which reproduce autonomously. Plants, animals, bacteria, they all have the necessary machinery to reproduce independently. Viruses don't. They are more like parasites, relying on a host to propagate. Now let's talk about growth. In biological terms, growth refers to an increase in size and complexity. It's a fundamental characteristic of living organisms. They start from a single cell, then multiply and differentiate into various types of cells, forming tissues, organs, and ultimately a whole organism. But viruses don't grow. They remain the same size and complexity throughout their existence. Once a virus is assembled, it's done. There's no development, no maturation. It doesn't get bigger or more complex. It's a static entity, waiting to infect a host and replicate itself. In summary, the non-autonomous reproduction and lack of growth in viruses highlight their distinct nature. They are reliant static entities that exploit host cells to replicate. They don't possess the independent reproductive capabilities or the ability to grow that define other life forms. These characteristics clearly underline the non-living nature of viruses. Lastly, let's explore the lack of response to stimuli and the ability to crystallize, two more non-living characteristics of viruses. Despite their seemingly complex behaviors, viruses are notably unresponsive to external stimuli. Unlike living organisms which react to changes in light, sound, temperature, and more, viruses exist in a state of stasis. This isn't to say that viruses are entirely immune to environmental changes. In fact, their structural makeup can disintegrate if their environment is altered beyond certain physical or chemical limits. However, this isn't a conscious response or adaptation. Rather, it's a passive result of the virus's inherent instability outside of its host. Now let's delve into one of the most fascinating aspects of viruses, their ability to crystallize. This is a process that we typically associate with inanimate substances, not with entities that can replicate and cause disease. Yet in the right conditions, viruses can form organized, solid structures, effectively turning from a fluid state into a crystalline one. The crystallization of viruses was first observed in the early 20th century, which led to significant debate about their living status. Scientists were able to draw out viruses from their host cells and, using specific techniques, transform them into crystal structures. These crystal structures could be stored and then, when introduced to a suitable host, would once again behave as infectious viruses. This ability to transition between states, to exist as both infectious particles and as non-infectious crystals, further distinguishes viruses from living organisms. It's a testament to the unique, almost paradoxical nature of viruses, straddling the line between the living and the non-living. In essence, the unresponsiveness to stimuli and the ability to crystallize underscore the enigmatic nature of viruses. They're entities that can replicate and adapt, yet they lack many of the fundamental characteristics that define life. These final characteristics solidify the unique non-living status of viruses. Let's take a moment to summarize what we've learned about the non-living characteristics of viruses. Firstly, their acellular nature sets them apart. Lacking protoplasm, cellular organelles, and other components typically found in living cells. Their existence is minimalistic, comprising only of a genome and a protein coat, sometimes with an envelope borrowed from the host's cell membrane. Secondly, they lack metabolic machinery. They have no respiratory mechanisms and cannot produce their own energy. They are completely dependent on their host for energy, showing no anabolic or catabolic reactions within themselves. Thirdly, their reproduction is not autonomous. They rely heavily on the host's cellular machinery to replicate their genome, produce their protein coat, and assemble viral components. Also, viruses do not grow in size or complexity, and they do not respond to environmental stimuli. Yet, they're not immune to changes in their physical or chemical state. And finally, they can be crystallized, a characteristic not typical of living entities. Remember, while viruses may seem like living organisms due to their ability to replicate, they lack the core characteristics that define life. This makes them one of the most fascinating subjects of study in biology.